This was the Strasbourg Court in France, also known as the European Court of Human Rights. That seems like a fairly important title to give to something that's going to very clearly be screwed up and end up doing the opposite of what it was intended for. Anyway, the first big ruling was on the EU Copyright Directive, specifically Article 11 and 13 were the controversial pieces. It passed 438 to 226, with almost none of the amendments passing. Article 11 ensures that internet companies will have to pay news outlets to host their content, effectively stifling a lot of the sharing and free market vitality given to certain pieces of work or certain products, and making it so that algorithms and AI will have to be implemented to keep track of all of the content posted. And Article 13 is even worse, because it would require internet giants to filter all of their copyrighted material. This is why people say that they're banning memes, because in large part, that's what's going on. And there was an amendment put forth that said if your country has fair use laws, then they should overrule the articles in this EU copyright directive. And it was rejected. Europe has no fair use laws anymore, especially because there's an eerie vagueness to a part in Article 11 where it says simply that insubstantial parts of news pieces or scientific work won't be treated as the norm. But what does insubstantial mean, and what's the norm? I mean, they're not clear, and it reminds me of Animal Farm, where the rules are malleable, and as I'm sure you can tell, I've changed out the book because I finished Animal Farm, and it's funny going from that book to this story because it's very Orwellian, and I only have the Federalist Papers up because I'm reading that today. Starting probably early next week, there's going to be a new book up, so that'll be interesting to get that up. And I covered the EU Copyright Directive in another video that'll be linked below, but that goes much more in depth on the specifics of the legislature. But this is just the first ruling that I'm talking about that this court has handed down recently that was really just a middle finger to the anti-establishment crowd in Europe. Now, the other thing that the European Court of Human Rights recently ruled on is something that I mentioned in my live stream yesterday, but I didn't connect these two stories prior to that live stream. GCHQ data collection regime violated human rights, court rules. And this type of data collection was something that Edward Snowden released. He leaked top-secret NSA documents which led to revelations about the way that phone and internet communications are surveilled by the US government. And it's true that the Strasbourg Court ruled that the interception of massive amounts of online communication was illegal, but they also ruled that the GCHQ sharing sensitive digital intelligence with foreign governments was not illegal. This means that the GCHQ can keep monitoring US citizens for the NSA without a warrant, and vice versa. This all goes back to Five Eyes between the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Those 5 countries agreed to not spy on each other, but let's think about this now. The Trump dossier wasn't the only piece of evidence that Obama's FBI went back to the FISA court with. They also went with evidence of the Trump Tower meeting that was orchestrated by Fusion GPS, even though I'm sure that the FBI didn't mention that to the FISA court. So how did the FBI obtain evidence showing that the Trump Tower meeting was all set up? Well, first they had to get the Russian spy Natalia Veselnitskaya into the country illegally, so they had to be integral in setting up the meeting. But that wouldn't hold enough water on its own. If the FISA court just said, "How did you know about this meeting?" the FBI can't say, "Well, you see, we helped get this woman into the country illegally." And they also can't admit that they've been surveilling the Trump team illegally for a few months at this point. So they got someone else to provide the evidence of this meeting. Who was that? Well, it's presumed to be GCHQ. It makes sense with the Five Eyes program since it's spying for the current administration at the time instead of on them, and it coincides with Christopher Steele and Bruce Orr's connection, which is that they worked together back in the day, both involved with GCHQ, and it coincides with the reasonable steps to acquire evidence for the FISA court without putting Obama in serious risk, and it's pinned down that some foreign agent had to acquire the information for the FISA court to absolve the FBI of wrongdoing, and all of that had to be legal. The most plausible answer in all of this, by a lot, is that GCHQ surveilled the Trump team for the NSA through Five Eyes. The NSA shared the information with the FBI since all of the intel agencies in the US share everything anyways, and then the FBI handed the information over to the FISA court for the warrant to cover their past wiretapping and to permit wiretapping in the future. And this was wiretapping the FBI was doing, not wiretapping the GCHQ was doing. So this is a pretty serious ruling handed down by the Strasbourg Court, because it means that this type of loophole-ridden corruption can and will continue to take place, not just in Europe, but America and other nations as well. So that's really all for this video. I just wanted to bring the European Court of Human Rights to the sunlight because, you know, they'll get a lot of attention for the EU copyright directive because banning memes is clickbaity, but this GCHQ ruling is not as clickbaity, but it needs to be talked about too. And it's great that they ruled that the global mass surveillance program violates human rights. But allowing the GCHQ to share sensitive digital information with foreign governments opens the door for numerous other issues, some of which I've outlined in this video. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate the support. Donation